Hey there, it's Lara back with your horoscope video for the full moon in Aries, which is happening on October 20th, 2021. So this is taking you through October 20th through to November 2nd. So that 2-week time frame between this full moon and the next new moon is what we're doing here in this video. So this full moon is, it's a pretty big energy that's going on, and we're going to break down why that is, and I'm going to show you the chart, and then of course I'm going to take you through all 12 signs and give you a little tidbit in terms of where this is happening for you and what you might expect. So I'm trying to get this done in a little bit of a shorter time frame because I have my brother and sister-in-law are leaving. They've been here for 5 days and they're taking off this afternoon. I haven't seen them in 2 years. So it's been, a busy 5 days, and I'm a little bit tired, but I want to say goodbye to them before they leave. So let me bear with my, my tiredness, if you will, and let's get this done. So we just had Mercury and Jupiter station direct on the 18th of October, 2021. And so, that I talked about that on Facebook and Instagram a little bit. And, so we are at this point where we've got some forward momentum building, right? And that will continue on for the remainder of the year. And in fact, the remainder of this year is pretty active, shall we say. I think we're going to see a lot of, we're going to kind of see the crescendo of the year, shall we say. And there's a few reasons for that. And this full moon that's happening in Aries, which is in a T-square to Pluto and conjunct Mars, is sort of the inception point of that. And Aries as a cardinal sign is an initiator, right? The cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, they are the initiators of the zodiac. They mark the turning points of the year. The solstices and the equinoxes, right, take place during those 4 seasons. And so they have this energy of, the tipping point built in, and of initiating something new, right? And Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. So Aries is that initial inception point, that initial spark as a fire sign that gets the blaze going, right? And so that's kind of what's going on here at this full moon. I'm going to show you the chart right now before I forget, and point out the relevant pieces. Got a bit of a shadow going on here, but I think you can still see pretty clearly. So here we have the moon at 27 degrees of Aries. And across the sky, we have the sun at 27 of Libra, right? Remember, full moons are always when the sun and the moon are opposite each other in the sky. And right close to the sun, we have Mars at 23 of Libra. And I think I said the moon was conjunct Mars, so sorry about that. It's the sun, right? But the Mars is opposite the moon. So there's that opposition. And then these are both, the sun and the moon are both, in a square 90-degree angle to Pluto in Capricorn at 24 degrees of Capricorn, right? And then we also have Jupiter in Aquarius, who's stationed direct now, in a trine to Mars, right? So that's going on. Okay, so hopefully you can see all that, and let's talk about what that all means. Well, and I have my notes down here, so that's why I'm looking this direction every so often. So as I said, a full moon is always when the sun and the moon are opposite each other in the sky. And there is this point in the cycle where there is some sort of, opposing, two opposing forces kind of thing that are facing off and that are looking for maybe some compromise, or they are acknowledging one another in some way. And so, the moon doesn't give off any light of its own. It reflects the light of the sun. And at the full moon point of the cycle, it's fully reflecting. the light of the sun. And so things that may normally be in the dark, that we may not normally see or recognize, sort of are illuminated, you know, in their full glory at the point of the full moon, good, bad, or otherwise. And so that's why we associate full moons with concepts like illumination and something, you know, things coming to light, things rising to the surface. The moon pulls on our emotional waters, right? Just as it pulls on the tides. And so oftentimes at full moons, our emotions come to the surface to be released, to be acknowledged. And so, you know, and this can be a time at this particular full moon, because there's all this dynamic sort of potentially sort of disruptive, explosive kind of energy going on with this T-square to Pluto and Mars involved, you know, in the sign of Aries, Mars's sign. There is some possibility that we may see some of those fiery emotions, right? Like anger, rage, that sort of thing. So that's good to be mindful of, you know, and to really sort of check yourself, but also acknowledge that anger is a valid emotion that needs to be felt and expressed and released, as long as we do that in ways that honor our boundaries and the boundaries of others. So, you know, that's an important thing to remember. So we could see some, you know, some inflamed emotions around this time, but we do have this T-square to Pluto that's exacerbating that potentially. So in a T-square, you've got, you know, I was showing you the sun and the moon are in opposition. Mars is there as well. And so all of these planets are squaring Pluto. So Pluto is at the apex of that T-square. And it's like, so, you know, this is an energy of, like I keep using this word, inflammation, potentially friction. Something's got to give. It's like a T-square, you know, is this kind of no pain, no gain sort of dynamic, right? And it is quite a dynamic energy where some, like, when we just have a square going on, action needs to be taken to release that tension. But like with a T-square, that's even more so. And Pluto at the apex, right? Pluto, the god of the underworld, is like the valve on the pressure cooker in this scenario. And Pluto can be likened to that in general. And then as the apex of a T-square, you know, more so. Pluto is known for its tendency to sort of bring things up from the depths, right? To cause things to erupt, so to speak. And so I get this image of, you know, Pluto or Hades, right? Releasing the hellhounds sort of thing. So, but sometimes that needs to happen for us to know where we stand, for us to be able to clear the you know, that sort of eruptive energy clears the debris, or, you know, we can kind of see what's left once that kind of eruption happens, and that's what we have to work with, sort of thing. We have Mars in Libra, which is the sign of its fall, and so it's not super comfortable there. It's in Venus's sign, right? And we've spoken about that in other videos, so I'm not going to talk about that here. And we have the sun in Libra, and the sun is in its fall in Libra, and we have the moon in Aries, which is Mars's sign, right? Along with Scorpio. Mars also rules Scorpio in traditional astrology. So there's this air and fire energy going on here, between, you know, Libra, the air sign, and Mars, the fire sign. And it's a cardinal energy, an energy of, you know, that initiatory sort of push forward or spark. And so, and we have Mars and Pluto, these sort of fiery eruptive energies. And so this seems to conjure up images of some sort of eruption or a reckoning of sorts. And the other thing I didn't point out to you on the chart, but we do have still, right, Aries, who we've spoken about before, the goddess of discord and chaos, is in an exact square to Pluto in Capricorn, Eris and Aries. And so this energy is present at the time of this full moon as well. And so, you know, we may see some disruption, eruption around things like women's issues or gender issues and social justice in that way, shape or form, you know. Something along those lines anyways, it is likely. So, you know, and it may not be, that may not be something directly in our own personal lives. It sort of depends on how closely this is all hitting your chart, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But, you know, on the world stage, I think we're likely to see some kind of disruption going on. But if you look at this energy in a more constructive way, because it does have the potential to be very constructive. Squares have the potential to be really life-changing if we work with them sort of constructively. And speaking of constructively, there has been some kind of machinery going on and off in my neighborhood close by every so often. So you may hear that in the background. So apologies for that, but I think I probably speak loud enough to for you to hear me. Anyway, so if we're working with that constructively, it has the potential to really allow us to kind of grow in leaps and bounds here. So you know, I was thinking about this, and like the image that came to mind is like, there's this, if you've ever seen somebody, or if you've ever done it yourself, you know, with a champagne bottle or some kind of sparkling, you know, juice or whatever in a bottle that has a cork in it, and you know, you see people shake that bottle and the cork flies out and the liquid, you know, the champagne just sprays all over the place, right? So it's that kind of like celebratory moment potentially as well. But, you know, hopefully the cork doesn't sort of pop out and like, you know, smash the window or something, something like that. But, you know, I suppose if it does, then maybe that window needed to be replaced anyhow. You know, it's that kind of thing. And we have, the other kind of positive thing here is that we've got Mars, as I was showing you on the chart, in a trine to Jupiter in Aquarius. And Jupiter has just stationed direct, right? And trines are conversations of ease and flow and support. And so, you know, Mars, that energy of taking action, of will, of courage, of, you know, that warrior-like energy is being supported by Jupiter, who expands and grows and uplifts, right? And is the great benefic. So, you know, whatever potential disruptions happen or actions that need to be taken, or will we need to muster, or courage we need to muster, we have the support of Jupiter there. And, you know, I think that, like I was saying, I think I was saying to you earlier in the video, that the latter part of this year, like the last few months of the year, are really, we're kind of going out on a bang, if you will. You know, Saturn and Jupiter initiated a new cycle, right? A new 20-year cycle and even greater new 200-year cycle back at the solstice last year, at the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere. So, you know, this is a time like we are coming upon a time where Saturn is about to come into its last square with Uranus on December 24th this year. And we've got Jupiter direct, we've got Saturn direct now. You know, they're doing their work in Aquarius. And so I really think that over the next few months, well, until the remainder of the year, right, we could see some kind of, like I keep using that word, sort of disruption or explosion of sorts. But after the dust settles, then we see exactly what's left and what we have to work with and how we can move forward, right? So if you look at any potential disruptions or calls to action, or sort of reckonings that happen on the world stage or in your own personal life experience or the experience of the people around you, if you look at those as things that need to happen in order for us to move on, then even if it's difficult, we can kind of see the necessity in it. We can be a little bit more sort of accepting of whatever that is, right? And willing to kind of work with it. So this full moon is the culmination point of the new moon that happened in Libra a couple of weeks ago, and also the new moon that happened in the same sign in Aries, right? Where this full moon is happening on April 11th of this year. And that new moon was at 22 degrees of Aries, so not that far off of where the full moon is happening. And so if you think back to that point in April, right, around April 11th, what was initiated for you at that time? What did you see happening in the world that was, you know, sort of this, like, something that sparked, you know, the spark that started the blaze sort of thing? And you can get a sense of what the themes are that are now reaching this, like, point of fullness or culmination, right, in your life and potentially in the world. So I just want to say a little bit more about Aries before we dive into each sign. So Aries is a cardinal fire sign, like I mentioned to you. It's the first sign of the zodiac. It's that sign that initiates, that sparks. You know, I think of it almost like initiation by fire. I kid you not. I think the lawnmower's out again. It wouldn't be a video recording if that didn't happen. So maybe in the wintertime it'll be the snowblower. I don't know. Anyways, we're just gonna roll with it. So I'll just talk louder over the noise. So Aries is the warrior, right? Aries is the sort of key phrase or the catchphrase for Aries is I am. Aries is that energy of I am. It's the initial spark of life at conception sort of thing. That's the way I see it. You could also see it as, you know, the first breath. But I even see it more as like that, the conception point, right? And of like, I am incarnate, so to speak, right? I am here. And so Aries has this focus on the self and on self-sovereignty, self-leadership. You know, Aries goes after what it wants because it's sort of, that's its focus, that initial kind of drive, right? That primal instinctual kind of energy. And so there can be a big focus on that kind of energy around the time of this full moon. And it's a time for us to step into that sense of I amness sort of thing, right? And to our self-sovereignty. We know that we've got Chiron in Aries, you know, about halfway through its journey there. And Chiron in Aries for all of us on a collective level is speaking to healing our sense of identity, right? And our right to take up space in the world as who we authentically are. And so it's a time to really kind of step into that and be courageous in that, you know, authenticity. And that requires, as if, you know, if you're somebody who listens to Brene Brown at all, or has read any of her books or watched her TED Talk or anything like that, you know that courage and vulnerability are a package deal. So we are not truly courageous unless we are vulnerable, unless we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And it is a very vulnerable and courageous move to allow yourself to be seen for who you truly are. And so we're all being called to that, right? And it may, like that word reckoning keeps coming to mind. It may be a reckoning for for ourselves personally, or for the people around us, or for, you know, the world at large in some way. We may come to this point of reckoning in our lives, and that, you know, how personally you experience that will depend on what you've got going on in relation to this full moon in your chart. So if you have any personal planets or significant points, you know, angles around those like around the 27-ish degree mark of Aries, of Libra, of Cancer, or Capricorn, you are likely to experience this full moon energy more potently, more personally, right? And don't forget, like, Pluto's in that other cardinal sign of Capricorn around that 24 degree mark. So, you know, we're talking sort of the latter, you know, even sort of the latter kind of 10 degrees of the cardinal signs, but most potent around, you know, that range of 23, 24 to 27, 28 of the cardinal signs. So if you've got something going on there, then this is likely to be experienced a little more personally for you. You know, and as I've said many times before, I have a Saturn-Venus conjunction at 23, 24 of Aries in my 8th house. And so, yeah, I'm getting hit with this full moon, and that Pluto is squaring that in my own chart exactly, and Aries is sitting right on top of that, right, for me. And so it's been potent. Let's just put it that way. So the other couple things I just wanted to mention to you before we take it through the signs is that on October 23rd, the sun will move into Scorpio. So kicking off Scorpio season. And on October 30th, Mars will follow suit and move into Scorpio, right? Where it's in domicile. It's at home in Scorpio. And so when that happens, when that fixed sign of Scorpio is triggered, it will trigger the Saturn, you know, it'll trigger Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, which is another fixed sign, and Uranus in Taurus, another fixed sign. You know, as the faster moving planets all move through Scorpio, all of that energy is going to be triggered. Really kind of further catalyzing, you know, the end of the year sort of thing. And I think, and then we've also got Venus, who is going to station retrograde on December 19th in Capricorn at 26, 27 degrees of Capricorn. So we're moving towards that going on as well, and that further trigger of that cardinal energy, right? And that Pluto in Capricorn as well. So the last time, you know, Venus was retrograde was June 2020. So anyway, I'm not going to belabor that because we're really focusing on the full moon, but that's just a heads up about that. And then, so I was using that word catalyst, and I've been using the word reckoning. So, you know, this full moon, I really think is the catalyst for the remainder of the year, for whatever sort of big bang is happening. You know, we've also got the eclipses coming very shortly here. So we've got an eclipse in Taurus, which will kick off the next 18-month cycle of eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. And then we have, overlapping that, we've got the final eclipse in Sagittarius that is closing out the Gemini Sagittarius eclipse cycle that's been going on for the last 18 months, right? And of course, again, that final Saturn square Uranus on December 24th. So big things are happening from this moment forward. You know, so keep that in mind. So without further ado, let's take it through the signs here. And I'm going to speak to you briefly about the axis that this full moon is happening on for you. So the sun and the moon right across the sky from each other. What axis is that triggering? And then where is that Pluto point in your chart? So, you know, in Capricorn, that is, as I was saying, sort of the release valve on the pressure cooker, right? The apex of the T-square. So where we may see some sort of Plutonian moment go on for ourselves, or if it's not felt personally, for the people around us or in our, you know, in the wider world. So we're going to start with Aries. And Aries, for you, this is hitting your 1st and 7th house axis, right? So you've got the moon in your 1st house, the sun in your 7th, and then Pluto in your 10th. So let's talk about the 1st, 7th axis first. This is the axis of relationship, right? The self in relation to others. The 1st house is the self. It's about you, your physical, you know, incarnate body, and your, like, how you show up in the world and how the world perceives you. And it can be about your physical sort of vitality as well. The 1st house is all about us. So things that go on in the 1st house can have far-reaching effects in our lives, right? It's our sense of self and how we relate to ourselves, and then how the world perceives us. And then across the sky, the sun is sitting in your 7th house of the other, and that's the house of sort of close personal relationships, right? So this is the axis of relationships. So there is undoubtedly something being triggered here, something being illuminated, something coming to fruition or culmination in terms of relationships in your life. And, you know, again, think back to the new moon on April 11th of this year, 2021, and think about, you know, what was conceived of then, and how is that coming to a moment of fullness, or perhaps release, or something along those lines at this moment. And then in the 10th house, you've got, you know, energies of career, of your worldly ambitions, of the legacy you wish to leave, of, you know, your relationship to authority and authority figures and your own authority, you know, out in the world. And so this is where that Pluto sort of release valve is, right? And it may be a catalyzing energy for that relationship axis. And there may be something going on in terms of relationship and career or legacy, that kind of thing, to work through at the time of this full moon for you. So I'm going to not go into specifics here, because there's just, you know, when we're bringing like the Pluto energy into it too, there's so many potentials that I think if I just give you those key life areas, and I've spoken, you know, about the dynamic here with the T-square in the introduction, which hopefully you've listened to, you will get a sense of what this means in your own life, right? And how to work through that that friction. You know, it's the capacity to handle that friction or potential sort of eruption with grace, but with courage and vulnerability, you know, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to leave that there for you, Aries. I'm going to move on to Pisces now, where Pisces, you've got the 2nd, 8th house axis being triggered, which is you know, the sun or the moon in your second house, the sun in your eighth house. And this is the axis of resources. It's the axis of material form versus transformation. You know, and like I said, resources. So your resources, second house, other people's resources, eighth house. And so there is something undoubtedly going on here at the time of this full moon for you that involves that, right? It may involve things like working with, you know, like your money versus other people's money, your time and energy versus, you know, the time and energy of others, and your sort of entanglements with others, other people, other institutions. You know, eighth house can be things like where the sun is sitting, things like taxes, debt, insurance, loans, inheritance, you know, those sorts of things. And then the second house is generally the money you make, or your, you know, the time and energy you put into things to get your basic needs met, right? Excuse me. So there's a tension going on here, and there is something sort of, there is a catalyst with this Pluto energy and the 11th house for you, right? That is the release valve in your case, because that's where Pluto and Capricorn is sitting for you, in that 11th house of the group, of friends, of benefactors, of the people who can help you get where you want to go, of your supporters and your allies, right? So there's a dynamic going on here between resources and, you know, those 11th house themes, like I just mentioned to you, in some way, shape, or form. And I think, like, I'm going to keep it simple here, because I was saying to Aries, like, without going into specific examples, that could get pretty complicated in this scenario. But I think that if you've listened to the introduction and you're getting a sense of like the life areas that are being triggered for you, and if you think back to that April 11th new moon that happened in Aries of this year, of 2021, and what was sort of being conceived of then, that is now reaching this moment of reckoning, this moment of illumination, of reaching a crescendo, of coming to, you know, coming full to this point of fullness. So, you know, think about what that is for you, and think about how, you know, that discussion we had in the intro about there may be some real Martian energy going on with like a sense of like, you know, having to sort of play the warrior, you know, stepping up with courage, with vulnerability, with authenticity, in some way, shape, or form around these themes for you. So I'm going to leave that there for you, Pisces. I'm going to move to Aquarius now, where we've got the third, ninth house axis being triggered for you, with the moon in the third and the sun in the ninth at the time of this full moon. And that is the axis of the mind. It's and our communications in some ways, but very much the axis of the mind, of our personal sort of environment and the wider world, right? Our what we know in our immediate circle, and expanding our horizons, our thoughts, our perceptions, our ideas, our learning and teaching experiences, you know, our how we communicate with each other. All of these themes are being triggered at the time of this full moon for you. And then you've got Pluto in your 12th house, digging deep into the unconscious there, going behind closed doors and pulling the skeletons out of the closet of, you know, the 12th house is, it's secrets. It's the unseen world. It can speak to your spiritual life and mental health and, you know, ways we sabotage ourselves. It can be even things around places that are tucked away from the world, places like hospitals and other types of institutions, right? So Pluto is catalyzing, like like I was saying, that's the pressure cooker valve being released, or the cork popping out of the champagne bottle in the 12th house there. You know, and things are erupting there, and they may very well be connected to that 3rd, 9th house axis and those themes that I spoke about. And of course you have Saturn and Jupiter in your sign, both now direct. So there is a lot going on for you, Aquarius. You know, hang tight. It's a moment where you are required to, you know, to harness that energy we were talking about in the intro of courage and vulnerability, and stepping into your authenticity and that sense of I amness, right? And maybe speaking, in this case, having to do with this 3rd, 9th axis, speaking your truth kind of thing, you know, courageously. So that is what's being triggered for you at the time of this full moon. And, you know, I think that if you've listened to the introduction and you look back to the April 11th, 2021 new moon in Aries that happened, you'll get a sense of like what's coming to that point of culmination now, right? What sort of got off the ground, or what was first conceived of back then, that is now reaching a point of fullness, or perhaps, you know, a need for release or something like that in relation to whatever that was. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there for you, Aquarius. Going to move on to Capricorn now. So Capricorn, for you, this full moon is hitting your 4th, 10th house axis, right? Moon in the 4th, sun in the 10th, across the sky. And this is the axis of the personal and the private, you know, versus like what's going on in the outside public world. So 4th house is home, family, roots, ancestry, place of living, you know, and 10th house is career matters, public life, legacy. You know, 4th house is the legacy that has been left to you. 10th house is the legacy you wish to leave, sort of thing. And so this is the axis being triggered by the full moon. Something is reaching a culmination point at this around the time of this full moon in relation to those themes. And we've got Pluto sitting in your 1st house, right? Because Pluto's in your sign, Capricorn, as you probably well know by this point, and is really, really churning over the soil there, and causing some disruptions to your self, right? 1st house self, maybe your physical body, and your experience of your physical vitality, to how you show up in the world and how the world perceives you. Pluto is the great transformer, and it's in that 1st house for you. And that is where a release valve may be, you know, that release on the pressure cooker may be kind of exploding around the time of this new moon, or catalyzing something, right? Or the cork comes off the champagne bottle, so to speak, like we talked about in the intro there. And so there's some dynamic going on here between self, right? Pluto in Capricorn, and home, family, roots, like I was talking about, and public life, or legacy, or career. That's the dynamic that's going on for you. And no doubt, if you think about that, you will know personally what that is about for you. And, you know, as a cardinal sign, this is really, this moon is in tension. So for you, because, you know, your sign squares Aries, right? So that's, like, it's quite dynamic. But if you look back to April 11th, around that time, there was a new moon in Aries, right around the same few degrees of Aries. And, excuse me, you could think about like what got off the ground there, what was initiated at that point in time, and what's coming to fullness now, what's reaching a crescendo in relation to whatever that was. What is being illuminated, coming to light, coming up for release, those sorts of things, right? So that's what to look for, you know, and it's important to remember what we talked about, you know, harnessing that that natural ability that Aries has for rising to the occasion, right? For stepping into its own sort of sense of self and being its authentic self. So, you know, and that requires courage and vulnerability. So that's what's going on for you, Capricorn. And we're going to move over to Sagittarius now. So Sag, for you, we've got this full moon playing out on the 5th, 11th house axis. And so, you know, you've got the moon there in your 5th house of children, of things that surround that notion of, you know, anything around children, pregnancy, you know, even like sex, romance, that falls into the 5th house, but also things that you create out in the world, right? Creative projects, anything that sparks a sense of joy and pleasure for you. That's all 5th house. So you've got the moon, the full moon there, and then across the sky, you've got the sun in the 11th house of, you know, of the group, of your collaborations, of your supporters and allies, and, you know, the people that can help you get where you're going, of your friendship groups and any kinds of groupings you're associated with and networks, that sort of thing. So this is where the full moon is playing out for you, right? And then there is this catalyst sort of energy going on, or this reckoning energy going on in the 2nd house, which is where Pluto sits for you. Pluto is sort of blowing the cork off, you know, and that 2nd house has to do with your personal resources. So your time, your money, your energy, your sense of self-worth and value, you know, and how you get your basic needs met, kind of thing. So those 3 houses are playing, you know, they're in this conversation of tension, like we talked about in the intro, that T-square that's going on, that can be quite dynamic and really can be quite productive if we allow it to be, and if we work with it constructively, right? And if we respond with a sense of courage and vulnerability and a willingness to be our authentic selves, then this is the best way to approach this. So I'm going to leave that there for you, Sagittarius. I'm going to move to Scorpio now, where we have the full moon playing out on the 6th, 12th axis for you. So you've got the moon in your 6th house, the sun in your 12th house to start with. And that is the axis of sort of order, which is 6th house, and chaos, which is the 12th house. What you do on the day-to-day, right? The daily grind, like what, you know, your daily work, whether that be paid or unpaid. And the routines that often have something to do with our sense of health and wellness. And the 12th house, which is sort of time spent away from daily routine. So time in rest, recovery, reflection, solitude, time behind closed doors, time we spend internally, even in the dream world, in connection to our spiritual life. Or in connection to, you know, our self-sabotaging behaviors, sometimes that are unseen to us, right? The 12th house can be things that are unseen, are sort of blind spots. So this is the dynamic going on there, right? There's that sort of back and forth kind of tension and a need for kind of compromise there. And then you've got Pluto sitting in your 3rd house of communications, your immediate environment and the people in it. You know, issues around teaching and learning, and sort of whatever's kind of, you know, swirling around, and the exchanges that happen on the day-to-day. So, and the back and forth, it can have to do with commutes, even when we're talking about the 3rd house, short commutes or shorter travel. And so Pluto's there, right? And Pluto is that cork on the champagne bottle, or the valve on the pressure cooker, and it's that moment of reckoning, perhaps, or a release in some way, right? It doesn't have to be like a bad thing. It's some kind of release. But these three houses are playing off each other in a conversation of tension. It's a very dynamic conversation with the capacity to really have some lasting impact, but it requires a working through the tension, and we're being called to do that in a way that is courageous and authentic, and really, you know, being our true selves, so to speak. So that's what's going on for you, Scorpio. I hope that gives you enough to go on. Definitely listen to the intro. If you think back to the April 11th, 2021, new moon in Aries that happened, you will get a sense of like, what's this connected to? Because at that time, something was initiated, you know, in the Aries house for you at the new moon. Something was conceived of, and now it's reaching a point of fullness or culmination, or coming to fruition, or need to be released. And in shorter term, that could be, you know, if you think back to the new moon we just had in Libra, so this last 2-week cycle as well, that this energy is connected to. Okay, so that's for you, Scorpio. I'm going to move on to Libra now, where Libra, just like Aries, this full moon is hitting your relationship axis, right? So you've got the, in your case, the moon in your 7th house of the other, of one-to-one close personal relationships, of contracts and agreements as well. And then the sun in your 1st house of self, of you, of how you come at the world, how the world perceives you, your sense of physical vitality, that sort of thing. Your sense of I amness, like we spoke about in the introduction. So that's where the full moon is happening for you. There's something going on this axis of relationship, of self-other, of your relationship to self, and maybe contractual obligations even. And, you know, then we've got Pluto in your 4th house of home, family, roots, place of living, ancestry, these sorts of things, your more private life. Pluto there is a reckoning going on there, or a catalyst happening, or like some sort of like, you know, a release valve being like if you think of a pressure cooker and, you know, how that works, or cork coming out of the champagne bottle, as we spoke about in the intro. Pluto is pushing things up, right, from beneath the surface, as it has a tendency to do. And there's some sort of dynamic going on here between those 7th, 1st, 4th houses at the time of this full moon, that's requiring potentially a call to action, potentially, you know, this notion of stepping into your authentic self, this notion of being vulnerable, of being courageous, right, of being the warrior, sort of Mars, Aries energy, and of kind of going for it there. So I think I mentioned to you, if you think back to April 11th, new moon in Aries, you'll get a sense of like what's coming to a sense of fullness now, what's coming up for release, what's coming up for, what's bearing fruit, what's reaching like that crescendo that began at that point about 6 months ago for you. Okay, we're going to move on to Virgo now. And Virgo, for you, this is hitting your 8th, 2nd house axis, just like Pisces, only in the opposite, because you're Pisces opposite sign. And so this is hitting this axis. You've got the moon in the 8th house and the sun in the 2nd house. So it's this axis of like sort of physical material form versus transformation, right? Of your personal resources, which means your money, your time, your energy, and other people's time, money, energy, right? Your entanglements with other people. So, you know, how you sort of make money, get your basic needs met, and how that happens in relation to others. So partners, things going on with partners' income, or in association with things like banks and taxes and wills and loans and scholarships and these sorts of things, potentially mortgages even. So there's that dynamic going on with the full moon. If you think back to around the April 11th of this year, when we had the new moon in Aries in the same sign, there were things initiated back then that are reaching this point of culmination now at the full moon, right? So think about what that was for you. And then you've got Pluto in your 5th house that's kind of blowing things up there in the 5th house. That is catalyzing. That is this like reckoning of sorts. That is somehow entangled with this full moon. And the 5th house has to do with children. It has to do with what brings you pleasure and joy in life, how you have fun in life, your creative pursuits and creative self-expression, right? So there is this intermingling of these energies, and it's in a T-square conversation, like we talked about at the intro, where it can be like tense, like something's got to give, right? But if we take the action and we step into our sort of sense of authenticity with courage and vulnerability, like we spoke about in the intro, we have a sense that we can really accomplish something of worth and of value here. So think about what that might mean in your own life, Virgo. You know, and again, think back to that new moon, and even this last 2-week cycle, the new moon we had in Libra, right? Where that point is reaching culmination now, but even more so 6 months ago to the new moon in Aries. So I'm going to leave you with that, Virgo. Thanks for listening, and definitely listen to the intro. And I'm going to move on to Leo now, where you have this full moon happening on your 9th, 3rd house axis. So just like your opposite sign Aquarius, but you know, the sun and the moon are in opposite spots. So you've got the moon in your 9th house and the sun in your 3rd house. So this is the axis of the mind, of our thoughts, perceptions, ideas, and how we communicate those. It's about teaching, learning. It's about what swirls around on the day-to-day for us in our immediate sort of environment, and regarding the people that we interact with on the day-to-day, and expanding our horizons in some way, you know, which is the 9th house. Teaching and learning can be involved here. Travel of sorts can be involved here. Communications. And like I said, like this concept of our thoughts, perceptions, words, ideas, that sort of notion, right? So there is something happening here for you at the time of this full moon that may have been sparked or initiated. Well, that was sparked or initiated at the time of the new moon in Aries, around April 11th of 2021. So think back to then, like what was getting off the ground then? What was being initiated then that is reaching a bit of a crescendo at this full moon? And then further to that, you've got Pluto in the 6th house of your daily work, of the daily grind, you know, checking off the ticky boxes, of the work you do, whether that be paid or unpaid, of how you are in service in some way, of your routines and how that can impact your health and well-being in some way as well. That's where Pluto's sitting, right? And so Pluto is like dredging things up there, and Pluto is acting as that that valve on the pressure cooker, that release point, that cork on the champagne bottle that's blowing, right? And so look for the dynamic between those 3 houses, the 9th, 3rd, and the 6th. And there may be some sort of tension to work through now, but if you approach that with a sense of courage and authenticity, and I amness, you know, as Aries does, as we spoke about in the intro, definitely don't skip the intro, then you can really make great gains here in relation to these things. So, you know, but you got to sort of play the warrior with honor and grace as well. So that's for you, Leo. I'm going to leave that there for you. And I'm going to move on to Cancer now, where we have this full moon happening in on the 10th, 4th house axis. So same as Capricorn, your opposite sign, but only sun and moon are in opposite places, right? So you, in your case, you have the moon in the 10th and the sun in the 4th. And this is the axis of public life, which is the 10th, versus private life, which is the 4th. The 10th house is the legacy that you wish to leave. The 4th house is the legacy you have been left, right? Home, family, roots, place of living is the 4th. What you do out in the world, career matters, public life is the 10th. You know, it can be the axis of parenting and self-parenting even. these are themes that can be triggered for you around this full moon. And something got off the ground or was initiated or began around the time of the moon, the new moon in Aries about 6 months ago. So you can think back to then, around April 11th, and think about what that is for you that is now reaching a point of release or culmination. You know, and it may also be related to what began around the Libra new moon a couple of weeks ago again. But then you've also got this dynamic of the 7th house, right? Pluto in your 7th house, transforming the relationships in your life, right? The one-to-one close personal relationships, as well as the notion of contracts and agreements in the 7th house. And Pluto is acting in this case as the valve on the pressure cooker, because it's in this T-square. It's at the apex of the T-square, which we talked about in the intro. And so there's that Pluto energy is involved in this release, right? And there may be some tension going on between those 3 houses that needs to be worked through, right? And that tension needs to be released by coming at it with authenticity, with a sense of courage and vulnerability, and you know, like being sort of that honorable warrior, if you will, in relationship. So I think that's gives you enough to go on, Cancer. Definitely listen to the intro, and we're going to move on to Gemini now. So Gemini, for you, you have this full moon playing out on the 11th, 5th house axis, which is the same as Sagittarius, your opposite sign, but sun and moon are in opposite places. So you've got, in your case, this the moon in your 5th house and the sun in your 11th house. Sorry, no, other way around. The moon in your 11th house and the sun in your 5th house. My apologies. And so you've got something going on here in relation. It's like individual versus the group, right? So the moon in the 11th is speaking to themes of friends, allies, supporters, the wider group, networks, hopes and visions for the future. And then the sun in the 5th is highlighting themes of creativity, of pleasure, of what sparks joy for you, of children, you know, those kinds of things. And so there's a dynamic going on here that's been happening, you know, that was initiated around the time of the new moon in Aries on April 11th of this year. Think back to then. What got off the ground then? What was initiated in your life in some way? And now it's reaching this point of culmination, right? And of illumination, of maybe needing to be released in some way. And it could also be connected to the new moon in Libra that happened a couple of weeks ago as well. And then further to that, you've got Pluto in your 8th house of, you know, that sort of cycle of death and rebirth, of other people's resources, you know, other people's money, time, energy, your entanglements with other people, right? Your psychological sort of depths. This can have to do with your partner's money, money that you owe, or money that is owed to you even. You know, all of these themes could play out. And that 8th house, Pluto, is the apex of this T-square that's happening, right? Which is this tension. And Pluto is the cork in the champagne bottle, or the release of the, you know, on the pressure cooker, like the release valve kind of thing. And is this kind of, you know, may bring about some moment of reckoning or catalyzing something. And, you know, calling us to be, you know, this is a full moon in Aries. We've got Mars there closely in close contact with the sun and Pluto in a tense conversation. So, you know, we're being called to be bravely and authentically ourselves, right? And to step up with courage and honor in some way, shape, or form. Okay, so that's what's going on for you, Gemini, and I hope that gives you enough to go on. Definitely listen to the intro, and I'll catch you in a couple weeks' time for the next video, for the next new moon that's happening. Last but not least, we've got Taurus. So Taurus, for you, the full moon is happening across this axis of the 12th and the 6th house, which is the same as Scorpio, your opposite sign. Only the sun and the moon are in opposites, right? So you've got the moon sitting in your 12th house and the sun sitting in your 6th house. So this is triggering the axis of order and chaos, right? Of what goes on the day-to-day, the work you do on the day-to-day and your daily routines, and how those may impact your well-being and your health, and how you are in service. And then how you spend time in rest and reflection and solitude and, you know, recuperation and even downtime. What goes on behind closed doors, your mental and spiritual wellness, you know, places that are tucked away from the world, your blind spots, you know, things that you're not aware of. These sorts of things are all 12th house, right? And so there's something going on in this axis. It may involve your health and well-being in some way. It may involve other people's health and well-being in some way. It may involve your daily routine and need to escape from that or balance that out in some way. You know, work versus rest kind of themes. But think back to the April 11th new moon that happened in 2021, 6 months ago, which was a new moon in Aries. And something at that time got off the ground. Something was initiated. And now it's reaching this point of fullness or culmination at the time of this full moon. And in shorter time frame, if you look back to the Libra new moon a couple of weeks ago, something, you know, that was sort of sparked around then may also be reaching this point of culmination or coming to fruition at this time of this full moon. And then further to that, you've got Pluto sitting in your 9th house of your worldview, of expanding your horizons, of travel potentially, of teaching and learning and publishing, all of these kinds of concepts. And there's something going on there with Pluto that's really transforming that area of life over the long term for you. But at the moment of this full moon, Pluto is the apex of this T-square we talked about. And so it's acting as this release valve, right? Or this like the cork on the champagne bottle, like I spoke about. I used that analogy in the intro. So definitely don't skip the intro. And so, you know, it's catalyzing something. And if we work with this dynamic, potentially sort of, you know, tense energy in a way that feels like a, you know, like we are embracing the archetype of the sort of honorable, brave warrior, which is Aries at its best. And this sense of, you know, I amness, like being our authentic selves, then we can really make great gains here, you know, but it may require that courage and that authenticity and a willingness to kind of to meet that Aries energy in our lives, right? So, okay, I'm going to leave that there for you, Taurus. And as I said, listen to the intro for sure. And that's all 12 signs. I know I kind of sped through this a little quicker than some, but still it's a little over an hour. And thank you for joining me. Please like the video. Please, you know, subscribe to the channel, and you can catch me in the meantime on Facebook and Instagram. The links to those are below. If you want to sign up for my website, which is soon to be launched at astrologymaven.com, the link for that is below. And if you do that, you'll get my free guide to working with the moon as a gift as well. So take good care. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye for now.